This maid. She doesn't belong here. The hiss of a voice cut through the polite murmur of the party. In the grand hall of the Hamptons mansion, beneath crystal chandeliers that scattered light across marble floors, Sophia Chen stood alone. The subtle glances and raised eyebrows from America's wealthiest families spoke volumes. They saw a young black woman who did not fit into their perfectly curated world. It was the most exclusive party of the year, a gathering of the country's most powerful, but the gilded illusion was about to be shattered forever. The trouble began when Preston Sterling, the 28-year-old heir to the family fortune, cornered her near the library. He swirled a glass of expensive whiskey, a smirk playing on his lips. "Look, sweetheart," he began, his tone dripping with condescension. "I don't know what charity scholarship brought you here, but this isn't a place where your kind should feel comfortable." When Sophia asked precisely what he meant by her kind, his response was devastating. "Come on, don't play dumb. Black girls like you only come to these events for one reason. Let me save you some time. Old money families like ours don't mix with your kind." That was when William Sterling IV, the 58-year-old patriarch, lost control. His face flushed with fury, he screamed for all 200 guests to hear, "I don't care whose bastard daughter you claim to be. Get this pretender out of my house before I call the police." But Sophia Chen didn't flinch. Instead, her voice cut through his rage like ice. "Mr. Sterling," she said calmly, "you just made the biggest mistake of your pathetic life." She pulled out her phone and speed-dialed a number. "Dad, it's Sophia," she said, her voice steady. "Burn it all down. The Sterling deal, the merger, everything. They want to play games? Let's play." The room held its collective breath. Who was this young woman, and why did a single phone call carry the weight of a billion-dollar threat? Sophia Chen was not just some party crasher. She was far more powerful than any of them could imagine, and her true identity was about to turn their world upside down. To understand the magnitude of that phone call, one must understand the players on this gilded stage. At just 18, Sophia had already accomplished more than most people do in a lifetime. While other teenagers worried about college applications, Sophia was graduating from MIT with a degree in quantum computing. But her story held an extraordinary secret. She was the daughter of Richard Chen, one of the most powerful tech moguls in the world. Richard Chen had built Chen Tech Industries from nothing into a $47 billion empire, his name appearing on Forbes lists next to Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. But for nearly 2 decades, he had kept his daughter hidden from the public eye. Sophia's mother, a brilliant Stanford professor, had a brief, passionate relationship with Richard in his early days. When Sophia was born, Richard made a decision to protect her from the media vultures and gold diggers that circle billionaire families. Growing up with her mother in California, Sophia had no idea her life was unusual. She simply assumed all children had quantum computing labs in their basements and could solve complex equations in their heads. At 18, she was now the head of her own quantum computing company, already being courted by Google and Microsoft for acquisition deals worth billions. She was brilliant, independent, and completely unaware of the immense power flowing through her veins. The family who had just sealed their own doom, the Sterlings, represented the decay of old money America. William Sterling IV had inherited every penny of his $12 billion fortune from ancestors who built their empire on shipping and steel. He had never created, never innovated, never risked a thing. His worldview was simple and toxic. Bloodlines determined worth, and people like Sophia Chen would never belong. His wife, Catherine, came from railroad money and had mastered the art of polite racism, discrimination hidden behind backhanded compliments. Their son, Preston, arrogant and foolish, was secretly driving the family business toward bankruptcy with a series of reckless investments, and their daughter, Madison, had turned casual racism into content for her 5 million social media followers. Her entire persona built on the belief that her family's money gave her the right to mock anyone she deemed beneath her. But others in the ballroom held pieces of the story. Margaret Whitfield, an 82-year-old matriarch, recognized something in Sophia's eyes, a resemblance to her old-school friend, Grace Chen, Richard's mother. A financial journalist named Robert Kim was there investigating rumors of Sterling Industries' financial troubles, carrying documents on his phone that could prove their desperation. And outside, sitting in his car, Richard Chen himself watched the entire scene unfold on a live security feed, his daughter being humiliated by people who had no idea they were destroying themselves with every word. The night had begun with a simple, poisonous assumption. As Sophia entered the mansion, Catherine Sterling had approached her with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Excuse me, dear," she'd said. "I believe you're in the wrong place. The diversity scholarship mixer is next weekend." When Sophia politely corrected her, Catherine's mask slipped. "Oh," she said, as if discussing an unpleasant medical procedure. "Well, I suppose we're trying to be more inclusive these days." Preston's attack was less subtle. He dismissed her as a tech blogger, then launched into his tirade about her kind seeking a rich white husband. His words, intended as a private whisper, carried across the room, poisoning the air. Guests gasped, but no one intervened. Racism, it seemed, was acceptable in high society as long as it was delivered with the right accent. The true climax, however, came from William Sterling. Calling for the room's attention, he delivered a speech that would become the most expensive racist rant in business history. "Tonight, we are reminded why bloodlines matter," he declared, his eyes fixed on Sophia. "Why heritage matters. Some people are born with the breeding and character that comes from generations of excellence, and others," he paused, letting the silence hang, "are born to serve." As scattered applause filled the room, Madison Sterling saw her moment. Pulling out her phone, she began live streaming to her 5 million followers. "Hey guys," she chirped, turning the camera on Sophia. "You are not going to believe this. There's this random black girl here who literally thinks she belongs with America's founding families." The comment section exploded with cruelty. Madison read them aloud, giggling. "Someone just asked if she came through the service entrance. You guys are terrible. But honestly, same energy." She didn't realize that her stream was being recorded, creating permanent evidence of her family's bigotry. While Madison turned racism into content, her mother organized a more intimate attack. Catherine gathered 3 of her closest friends, women who controlled fortunes in oil and banking, and they followed Sophia toward the powder room, cornering her in the marble bathroom like predators who had finally isolated their prey. What happened next was a masterclass in how the wealthy weaponize their privilege, a vicious attempt to humiliate a woman they saw as a threat, unaware that the real threat was not the young woman before them, but the world she was about to bring crashing down upon their heads. "Listen carefully, little girl," Catherine said, her voice honed to a razor's edge by a lifetime of destroying those who crossed her. "We know exactly what you're doing here, and we want you to understand that it will not work." The other women formed a silent, glittering semicircle, their couture gowns blocking Sophia's path to the door. These were not schoolgirls in a bathroom. They were matriarchs of immense fortunes, wielding their power to terrorize a girl of 18. Rebecca Morrison, whose family presided over an $8 billion banking empire, was the first to speak. "Gold digging your way into our circles might work on new money families who don't know any better," she sneered. "But we have seen your type before. We know precisely what you're after." "You think you can flutter in here in your little dress?" added Patricia Whitmore, heiress to an oil fortune that dated back to the Texas boom. "Bat your eyelashes at our sons and our husbands and trick your way into our world? Let me tell you something, sweetheart. Old money doesn't fall for such tawdry games." The final woman, Eleanor Blackstone, whose real estate empire owned half of Manhattan, delivered what she imagined was the killing blow. "We've already made some calls. By morning, every important family in this country will know who you are and what you tried to do here tonight. Your social climbing career is over before it began." They watched her, expecting tears, a desperate plea, a hurried retreat. They believed they were cornering a frightened social climber. They had no idea they were threatening the daughter of one of America's most powerful men, and that every contemptuous word was being recorded, soon to become evidence in a legal and financial nightmare that would consume their families for generations. The evening's humiliations, however, were far from over. Leaving the bathroom, Sophia tried to return to the main hall, only to find her path blocked by Preston Sterling. He was drunk enough now to say things that would immolate his career and his family's reputation. Hours of expensive whiskey had stripped away his thin veneer of civility. Seeing Sophia, he stumbled toward her, deciding this was the moment for what he considered a generous proposition. "Hey, there you are," he slurred, stepping uncomfortably close. "I've been thinking about our conversation. I want to make you an offer." What came next was so crude, so virulently racist. It would have been shocking from a drunken frat boy, let alone the Harvard-educated heir to a billion-dollar fortune. Look, I can see you're trying really hard to make connections, he continued, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. And I appreciate the hustle. I do. So here's the deal. You give me one night, a little time with real American royalty, and I'll make sure you get some startup funding. In his warped worldview, this was an act of charity. He was offering this ambitious girl exactly what she craved: money, access, in exchange for a favor he believed she should be honored to provide. I'm talking serious money, he said, his voice rising as other guests began to notice. 50, maybe 100,000 for your little tech company. That's more than someone like you makes in a year, right? When Sophia's face remained a mask of calm disdain, his tone curdled with irritation. Come on, don't play offended. We both know why you're here. This is just cutting straight to business. Nearby conversations faltered. Guests turned to watch the spectacle unfold, some with discomfort, others with morbid amusement, but no one intervened. This was the ugly theater of their world, where a young woman could be sexually harassed and racially humiliated, and as long as you were in the audience and not on the stage, it was merely entertainment. But it was Preston's father, William Sterling himself, who would elevate the evening's cruelty into a legendary act of public self-destruction. As the guests gathered in the grand ballroom for the charity auction, William took the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice booming with false sincerity. Tonight, we are not just raising money for worthy causes. We are also celebrating the values that make our great nation strong. He had decided to turn the auction into a platform for his vile ideology, with Sophia as his unwilling prop. Now I know we have some diverse guests with us tonight, William said, his eyes scanning the crowd until they locked on Sophia, and I think it is important that we help these people understand how things work in proper American society. What happened next was so audacious that several guests raised their phones to record it, unknowingly documenting the evidence that would soon be presented in lawsuits and congressional hearings. So, William continued with a chilling smile, I am going to auction off something truly special. I'm offering diversity training sessions for our international guests who might benefit from learning a little American business etiquette. He gestured directly at Sophia, leaving no doubt as to his target. A wave of nervous, sycophantic laughter rippled through the room. They were witnessing something that crossed every line of decency, but they were a part of it now. Do I hear any bids? William asked, his voice dripping with condescension. To help our friend here learn how to properly conduct herself in civilized society, perhaps a sponsorship for lessons in appropriate behavior. It was a ritual of humiliation, designed to cement Sophia's status as an outsider in front of 200 of the country's most powerful people. William Sterling thought he was demonstrating his dominance, putting an uppity young woman in her place. He had no idea he was providing the centerpiece for the largest racial discrimination lawsuit in corporate history. But just as the humiliation reached its crescendo, the energy in the room fractured. The massive ballroom doors swung open, and James Park walked in. He took in the scene at a glance, the smirking auctioneer, the laughing crowd, and his best friend standing alone, the focus of their collective scorn. James's expression hardened into something that would have sent a wiser man running for cover. He walked straight to Sophia, ignoring the whispers and stares, and leaned in close. Sophie, he whispered, his voice urgent but controlled. Your father's been watching the security feeds from his car. He's seen everything. He is nuclear-level furious. James paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The acquisition papers are ready, but after this, he's ready to burn their entire world to the ground. The acquisition, the partnerships, all of it. He just watched them do this to his daughter, and now he's going to show them what real power looks like. As this storm gathered, other, quieter currents were already flowing through the party. Earlier, during a lull, a woman named Elena Rodriguez had approached Sophia near the library. Excuse me, she had said, her voice low. I used to be a senior financial manager for Sterling Industries. There is something you need to know. On her phone, Elena showed Sophia a devastating picture of the family's true finances. They aren't just struggling, she whispered. They're 3 months from total collapse. Bankruptcy, this mansion, this party. It's all held together with loans and accounting tricks that would make Enron blush. They're hiding over $2.3 billion in debt. This deal with your father isn't just business. It's life or death. Without it, their empire is gone by Christmas." Then came Margaret Whitfield, an 82-year-old matriarch who had been observing Sophia all evening with a look of growing recognition. "My dear," she said, leading Sophia to a quiet corner, "I knew your grandmother, Grace Chen. We were roommates at boarding school. She was the most elegant woman I ever knew." Her eyes softened. "Your father called me last week. He told me his daughter would be here and asked me to watch over you. I had no idea," she sighed. "It would be this ugly." Richard Chen had not sent his daughter in blind. He had positioned allies in the room, witnesses to the truth. Now, standing beside James on the edge of the jeering crowd, Sophia felt the final pieces click into place. She knew they were bankrupt. She knew her father had seen everything. She knew he was ready to unleash hell, but she had one more secret, the one that was entirely her own. "James," she said, her voice now devoid of all emotion but a cold, clear certainty. "There's something else." He turned to her, sensing the shift. This wasn't the voice of a victim, it was the voice of a predator. "For the past 6 months," Sophia revealed, her eyes gleaming with a strategic brilliance inherited from her father, "I have been quietly buying Sterling Industries stock through a series of shell companies." James's eyes widened. "How much?" 23%, she said, the satisfaction in her voice as sharp as a diamond. "I now own nearly a quarter of the company that these people think they control. They don't just need our acquisition to survive, they need my approval as their largest minority shareholder." She looked out at the glittering crowd, at the family that had spent the evening trying to destroy her. "I've been positioning myself to control their fate for months," she said, "and tonight they gave me every reason to do it." The party continued, oblivious, but for the Sterling family the evening was already over. They had just spent hours humiliating their executioner. The most expensive lesson in human decency ever taught was about to begin, and their billion-dollar empire was the price of admission. William Sterling IV was in the middle of his closing remarks, weaving a tapestry of self-congratulation about another successful celebration of American excellence, when the tapestry unraveled. A sound cut through the polite murmur of the room, the sharp, deliberate click of heels on marble. Sophia Chen was crossing the ballroom floor, moving with the newfound authority of someone who had just realized she held every card in a game the others didn't even know they were playing. The hum of 200 conversations died at once. Every eye followed the 18-year-old black woman, the object of their thinly veiled scorn all evening, as she approached the stage where William Sterling stood, faltering. In a gesture that was both gentle and absolute, Sophia took the microphone from his unresisting hand. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice, crisp and clear, needed no amplification to fill the cavernous room. "But before this evening concludes, I think it's important you all know exactly who you've been speaking with tonight." A silence followed, so profound one could have heard the fizz of a champagne bubble bursting. William Sterling, for the first time that night, looked uncertain. The fog of his arrogance was finally pierced by her unnerving calm. "My name is Sophia Chen," she announced, her voice a bastion of strength. "My father is Richard Chen, founder and CEO of Chen Tech Industries." A collective, sharp intake of breath swept through the ballroom, the sound of 200 fortunes suddenly feeling very fragile, but Sophia was far from finished. "We came here tonight," she continued, her gaze sweeping over a sea of faces shifting from confusion to dawning horror, "to finalize the acquisition of Sterling Industries. A $1.8 billion deal. The deal that would have saved this family from the bankruptcy that awaits them in less than 3 months. The word bankruptcy detonated in the silent room. These people, who had spent the evening basking in the reflected glory of what they thought was unshakable old money, were now staring at the truth. Their hosts were frauds, living on borrowed time. The color drained from Preston Sterling's face so fast he looked like a marble statue of himself. His mouth worked, opening and closing, a fish gasping for air, but no sound emerged. The man who had lectured on the purity of bloodlines had just poisoned his own. His son, Preston Jr., who had been nursing another whiskey, lost his grip. The crystal tumbler shattered on the floor, the sound like a gunshot in the tomb-like silence, splashing amber liquid in glittering shards across the pristine white stone. It was Madison Sterling's reaction, however, that immortalized the moment. Still live streaming, her phone captured the scene perfectly. Her 5 million followers watched as her expression melted from confusion to recognition to sheer, unadulterated terror. "Oh my God," she whispered, a sound swallowed by the room but captured perfectly by her phone's microphone. "Oh my God. We are so screwed." The comments on her stream erupted, a digital torrent of shock and schadenfreude. The hashtag Sterling Static Racism, was already trending. Then, through the chaos, a new sound emerged. A single, slow, deliberate clap. Margaret Whitfield, the 82-year-old matriarch of their society, rose from her table. Her applause cut through the tension like a duelist's blade. "Grace Chen would be so proud," she announced, her voice ringing with an authority no one dared question. "Your daughter has more class in her little finger than this entire room combined." Margaret's endorsement was the first crack in the dam. Other guests, their minds racing, began to connect the dots. They hadn't just witnessed an act of social cruelty. They had participated in the sabotage of a major business deal, one their own portfolios might be tied to. William Sterling finally found his voice, but it was the desperate, pleading tone of a man watching his world burn. He lurched toward Sophia, his arrogance incinerated, replaced by the raw panic of irreversible error. "Miss Chen," he stammered, his voice cracking, "please. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. We had no idea who you were. If we had known, of course, we would have treated you with the respect you deserve." The words tumbled out, a pathetic attempt to erase an evening of bigotry with a few seconds of groveling. "Surely we can work something out," he begged, his hands trembling. "This is all just a misunderstanding. We're reasonable people. We can fix this. Please, just tell us what to do." His desperation was so absolute, it was almost painful to witness. A man who had built his identity on the bedrock of status was discovering it was all just sand. But while William groveled, Sophia's business partner, James, had been busy. Unnoticed, he had connected his laptop to the mansion's massive display screen, the same screen that had been cycling through photos of the Sterling's philanthropic triumphs. "Ladies and gentlemen," James's voice cut through William's pleading like a razor, "I think you all deserve to see the real story of the family you're celebrating tonight." The screen flickered to life, not with smiling photos, but with a cold, hard financial analysis. Bank records, debt statements, falsified reports, a projected bankruptcy timeline that was brutally imminent. "The Sterling family you've been worshipping," James said, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice, "is completely insolvent. They've been living on lies and borrowed money for over 2 years. The numbers were staggering: $2.3 billion in hidden debt, loan applications rejected by every major bank. The Sterling empire wasn't just dying, it was a corpse, propped up for one last party. Without the Chentech acquisition they just so gracefully destroyed," James continued, "Sterling Industries will file for Chapter 11 before Christmas. Everything you see, this mansion, the cars, this lifestyle, will be seized by creditors." A new wave of shock rippled through the guests. They had been duped, their own status tarnished by association with criminals. But the evening's nadir had not yet been reached. Preston Sterling, fueled by whiskey and rage, finally snapped. He shoved his way through the stunned crowd, his tuxedo askew, his face a mask of crimson fury. "You think your father's dirty tech money makes you better than us?" he screamed at Sophia, his voice a raw, unhinged bellow. "You think some new money computer nerd can waltz into our world and destroy everything we've built?" His tirade was being broadcast live to the world, every venomous word preserved for posterity. "We built this country," he shrieked, his voice climbing in pitch. "Our blood, our heritage. Our families built the railroads, the industries. Some immigrant's daughter doesn't get to lecture us about respect." The subtext of the evening, the simmering, polite racism, now burst forth in a volcanic eruption. "You're nothing," he screamed, jabbing a finger at Sophia. "Your family is nothing. All the money in the world can't change what you are, and what you are is not one of us. You will never be one of us." His own family members recoiled in horror. This was a public self-immolation. "This is our country," he roared, his voice breaking. "Our society, our world, and no matter how much money your people make, you will always be outsiders. You will always be pretenders. You will always be beneath us." The The silence that followed was absolute, the sound of a dynasty dying. As Preston stood panting, his racist bile hanging in the air, he had no idea he had just summoned a force that would grind his family's legacy to dust. The reckoning arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet, authoritative swing of the grand oak doors at the far end of the ballroom. Richard Chen entered. He moved not like a guest, but like a force of nature. At 55, he possessed the profound stillness of a man who had built a $47 billion empire from scratch. Flanked by a phalanx of security and lawyers, it was clear this was not a social call. The crowd parted before him like the Red Sea, an instinctive deference to a power that dwarfed their own. Richard's eyes were fixed on his daughter. In them was a father's pride, mingled with a cold fury that seemed to drop the temperature of the room. He reached the stage and placed a protective hand on Sophia's shoulder. "I believe," he said, his voice calm yet carrying to every corner. "You have all met my daughter." He drew her closer. "Allow me to properly introduce Miss Sophia Chen, MIT graduate at 18, a pioneer in quantum computing, and heir to the Chen Tech empire. But more importantly," his gaze swept the room, "she is my daughter, the most important person in my world." A murmur went through the crowd. The girl they had mocked was more accomplished than any of them could dream of being. Richard's voice turned to ice. "I have been observing tonight's festivities. Through the security system I had installed for our business meeting, I have seen exactly how you treated her." The implication hung in the air. Their transgressions had been recorded. Sophia looked up at her father. "Dad," she said, her voice clear, "they showed me who they are. I've canceled the deal." "That's my girl," Richard said, his approval absolute. "I raised you to never tolerate disrespect." Then he delivered the verdict. The $1.8 billion acquisition of Sterling Industries is terminated. The $5 billion in associated partnerships are also canceled, effective immediately. Sterling Industries will be bankrupt within 90 days. William Sterling physically staggered, a man struck by a mortal blow. "Let this be a lesson," Richard continued, his voice a quiet storm. "To every person in this room who stood by and said nothing. My daughter never needed your approval, but you, it seems, desperately needed ours." As he spoke, Madison's live stream was a wildfire. Sterling stock had plummeted 67% in after-hours trading. 3 major partners had already called to terminate their contracts. Richard Chen looked at the broken family before him, his face a mask of cold resolve. "My daughter," he said, "offered you redemption tonight. I am not nearly so forgiving." He turned, and side by side, father and daughter walked toward the doors. The crowd, silent and shamed, parted for them once more, leaving the Sterlings alone in the ruins of their fallen empire.